picturesque. 1978, California. A warm, sunny day. Roads stretching endlessly ahead. And a 5-year-old girl, Mary Vincent, just trying to get home. Back then, hitchhiking was common. People trusted strangers far more than they do today. So when a van slowed beside her and an older man leaned out with a gentle smile, Mary didn't hesitate. He said his name was Lawrence Singleton, and he seemed harmless. But in that moment, as she stepped inside, Mary had no idea she was entering the most terrifying chapter of her life, one that would test every ounce of courage she had. This isn't just a story about survival. It's about the human will to fight when all hope is gone. Stay with me, because what happened next would shock the nation and change U.S. law forever. It was a warm September afternoon in 1978, the kind of day that should have been ordinary. For most people, it was. But for one young girl, this day would carve itself into history as the day she faced the unthinkable. Her name was Mary Vincent. She was only 15 years old, just a teenager with a restless heart, a head full of dreams, and a desperate need to get home. She wasn't a rebel. She wasn't reckless. She was simply searching for her place in the world. Mary was hitchhiking that day, a common practice in the 72nd when the roads felt safer, or at least people thought they were. She stood on the side of a California highway, her thumb out, scanning the horizon for a kind stranger who might take her closer to her destination. And then he appeared, a smiling middle-aged man in a van, slowed to a stop. He looked like someone's friendly uncle. His voice was warm, his eyes calm. He told her he had a daughter her age, and that he could take her part of the way. Mary hesitated for just a moment, but the sun was dipping lower in the sky, and the road ahead was long. Against the quiet whispers of her instinct, she climbed in. That single decision would change everything. What Mary didn't know was that the man behind the wheel was no good Samaritan. His name was Lawrence Singleton. To the outside world, he was ordinary, blending into the background of everyday life. But inside lurked something far darker. As the van pulled away, the hum of the engine became the soundtrack to a journey that would twist into horror. The smile on his face wasn't kindness. It was calculation. The way he spoke wasn't casual. It was control. And every mile they traveled brought Mary further away from safety. Hours later, on a remote stretch of road, Singleton would reveal the truth. A truth that no one could have imagined. But here's the thing. This is not just the story of an unspeakable crime. This is the story of survival. Of a girl who refused to die. Of a teenager who, even after being left broken and bleeding, found the strength to fight back. She would crawl out of darkness literally and figuratively to bring her attacker to justice. She would stand in a courtroom, her voice steady, her courage unshaken, and she would change American law forever. So as you listen to this story, remember, it's not just about tragedy. It's about power. The power of will. The power of truth. The power of one person's refusal to be silenced. Stay with me until the end to hear how Mary Vincent's bravery forced America to confront its justice system, and why her story still matters today. Before the headlines, before the courtroom, before the night that would change her life, Mary Vincent was just a small-town girl with big dreams. She grew up in Las Vegas, Nevada, long before the flashing lights and casinos became the city's defining face. Back then, Vegas still had its shadows, and for Mary, those shadows sometimes reached into her own home. Her parents were hardworking, but life wasn't easy. Her father, a mechanic, was often away, fixing cars and trying to keep food on the table. Her mother, struggling to hold the family together, juggled the responsibilities of raising children and making ends meet. Money was tight. Arguments were common. And like many teenagers, Mary often felt like no one truly understood her. But Mary wasn't just another restless kid. She had an artist's heart. She loved to draw, to capture the world as she saw it. Friends remembered her as someone who could make you laugh one moment and then quietly sketch your portrait the next. She had dreams of becoming a dancer, maybe even joining a show in Las Vegas someday. A stage, music, lights, that's where she wanted to be. But in the summer of 1978, those dreams were put on hold. Her parents' marriage had fallen apart. The arguments became too much. And Mary, caught in the middle, felt a desperate need to escape, to find somewhere she belonged. So she made a decision, one that, back then, didn't seem unusual. She would leave Las Vegas and go to California. Hitchhiking in those days was almost a rite of passage for young wanderers. It was a different time. No one carried cell phones. No one thought twice about getting into a stranger's car. There was a kind of blind trust in the world, a belief that most people meant well. Mary packed light, just a few clothes, a sketch pad, and the determination to start fresh. She wanted to see the ocean. She wanted to feel the California breeze on her face. She wanted freedom. Standing by the side of the road, she must have looked like any other teenager chasing a new beginning. Thumb out, hair catching the wind, eyes full of curiosity, and maybe just a little fear. She had no way of knowing that the journey ahead would be nothing like the adventure she'd imagined, that her decision to climb into the wrong vehicle would lead her into the darkest hours of her life. But in that moment, the danger seemed impossible. She was young, she was hopeful, and she believed that the world was kinder than it really was. It was late September, 1978. California was in the grip of a long, dry summer's end. The air was warm, the kind of warmth that clings to your skin and carries the scent of sun-baked asphalt. The sky stretched endlessly, a pale blue canvas without a single cloud. Along the highway, heat shimmered on the road, blurring the horizon. The steady hum of traffic was broken only by the occasional rush of a passing truck. It was quiet, almost too quiet, the kind of stillness that makes the smallest sounds seem louder. Mary Vincent walked along the shoulder of the road, her thumb out, glancing over her shoulder every time a car approached. The soles of her shoes picked up fine dust from the roadside gravel. She was tired, but determined. Two other hitchhikers stood a little farther down, waiting like her. They'd all been passed by more than a few cars, each driver offering nothing more than a quick glance before disappearing down the highway. Then, in the distance, a van appeared. It was an older model, sun-faded paint, the kind of vehicle that looked like it had seen 1,000 miles. It slowed as it approached. The engine gave a low, heavy growl as it pulled over to the shoulder. The driver leaned across the passenger seat, rolling down the window. He was a middle-aged man with deep-set eyes, weathered skin, and a smile that seemed, at first glance, entirely friendly. "Where you headed?" he asked, his voice easy, almost warm. Mary told him she was going toward Interstate 5 on her way home to Las Vegas. The man nodded. He said his name was Larry, Lawrence Singleton. But then he added something strange. He said he could only take her, not the two other hitchhikers. There wasn't enough room in the van, he claimed. The other hitchhikers hesitated. One of them quietly told Mary, "I wouldn't go with him. Something feels off." Mary paused. The sun was dipping lower. The road ahead seemed endless. And Singleton, he kept smiling, kept assuring her that he was just trying to help. His tone was soft, his words careful. He talked about having a daughter close to her age. He said he understood what it was like to be stuck out here with no ride. In that moment, Mary made a choice. She convinced herself it was safe after all. He seemed polite, almost fatherly, and she needed to get moving before nightfall. She stepped toward the van. The metal handle was warm under her hand as she opened the door and climbed inside. Inside, it smelled faintly of gasoline and old upholstery. The passenger seat was worn smooth, the dashboard cluttered with maps and empty coffee cups. Singleton kept the conversation light, asking about her family, her plans, her dreams. But somewhere, deep beneath the friendly words, was something else. Something Mary couldn't quite name. Something she wouldn't understand until it was too late. At first, everything felt normal enough. The van moved steadily down the highway, sunlight flickering through the side window. Singleton made casual conversation, asking about her trip, about her family, even about her favorite music. It was the kind of small talk that could almost put you at ease. Almost. Because every so often, there was a pause, a glance. His eyes would linger just a little too long when she spoke. And sometimes, he didn't blink. Mary brushed it off at first. She told herself she was overthinking, that she just needed to relax. But then, the road signs started changing. She noticed one that pointed toward Interstate 5, the route she was supposed to be on. Singleton didn't take it. Instead, he veered onto a smaller, quieter road, surrounded by open fields. Mary's stomach tightened. She sat up straighter. I think we missed the turn," she said, her voice careful. Singleton glanced at her, then back at the road. No, this way's faster," he replied, his tone still calm, still wearing that faint smile. But something about the way he said it made her pulse quicken. It didn't sound like reassurance. It sounded final. The road grew emptier. Cars were few and far between. The warm afternoon light began to soften into early evening, the sun slipping lower, shadows stretching longer across the fields. Mary glanced at the dashboard. The fuel gauge. The maps crumpled in the corner. Everything about the van suddenly felt enclosed. Singleton kept talking, but the questions began to change. He asked about her life in more detail, her family's situation, whether she had a boyfriend, whether anyone was expecting her that night. With each question, her unease deepened. She noticed the way his hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles pale, muscles tense. Every so often, he would glance sideways at her, his eyes dark, unreadable. Her mind began to race. She thought about the warning the other hitchhikers had given her. She thought about the distance they'd already traveled. And she thought about how far they might be from anyone who could help. She shifted in her seat, turning slightly toward the door. The handle was right there, but the van was moving too fast. Jumping, wasn't an option. Not yet. The air inside felt heavier. Even the hum of the engine sounded different now, lower, more menacing. Mary tried to keep her voice steady. "So, where exactly are we headed?" she asked. Singleton didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, it was short. "You'll see." That was when the last traces of safety vanished. Her heartbeat quickened. Every instinct screamed that something was wrong. But the road stretched ahead, empty, endless, and the van kept moving. The sun had dipped low, painting the sky with streaks of deep orange and fading gold. They were far from the main highway now, traveling a lonely, winding back road. Fields stretched out on either side, and the nearest sign of life felt miles away. Singleton's voice had grown quieter. The small talk had stopped. Instead, he stared straight ahead, his hands fixed tightly on the wheel. Without warning, he slowed the van and turned down an even narrower road. Dust kicked up behind them as the tires crunched over gravel. Mary's chest tightened. This wasn't a shortcut. This was isolation. Finally, the van rolled to a stop in a deserted area. No houses, no traffic, nothing but open land, and the faint outline of distant hills. Mary's instincts screamed. She reached for the door handle, but Singleton was faster. He blocked her path, his face changing in an instant. The warm, fatherly smile was gone. In its place, something cold, calculating, and dangerous. His voice was low, but there was no kindness in it now. "You're staying here," he said. Mary tried to fight back, tried to reason with him, tried to run, but Singleton's grip was like steel. The reality crashed over her. She was trapped. What happened next unfolded like a nightmare she could not wake from. Singleton overpowered her, ignoring her pleas, his words sharp, mocking, and cruel. Every moment felt stretched. Every sound amplified the rustle of clothes, the scrape of shoes on gravel, the ragged sound of her own breathing. And then, the violence escalated to something unthinkable. Mary struggled with everything she had. Her mind raced through every escape she could imagine. But Singleton's decision was horrifyingly clear. He wasn't just attacking her. He was making sure she would never get away. He bound her. She felt the cold edge of metal. And then, in a moment so surreal it didn't feel real at all, he took from her something no human being should ever have to endure both of her arms. There was no time to process it, no time to scream loud enough for the empty fields to hear. Pain, unlike anything she had ever known, surged through her. But so did something else, a desperate will to live. Her body collapsed to the ground. The world blurred around her, spinning between darkness and fading light. She could hear Singleton moving, hear the van door slam, and then the sound of the engine. He left her there, in a ditch, alone, bleeding. The smell of earth and dust filled her lungs. The sky above was darkening fast, the first stars beginning to pierce through. Somewhere deep inside, Mary knew this was the moment. Either she would give in, or she would fight with everything she had left. So, with unimaginable pain, she pushed herself to her feet. She pressed the ends of her arms into the dirt to slow the bleeding. Every step forward, a battle against the pull of gravity. She didn't know how far she could make it. She didn't know if she'd survive the night. But she knew one thing: she would not die here, in this place, on his terms. At first, there was only darkness. No road, no sky, no time, just the heavy pull of nothingness. Then a sound, the faint whisper of wind brushing over the dry earth. And with it, pain. A searing, burning pain so deep it didn't feel real, like her body no longer belonged to her. Mary's eyes flickered open. Above her, the sky was now black velvet, scattered with cold stars. The smell of dust filled her lungs. Every breath felt sharp, like her ribs might give way. The memory of what happened came rushing back in fragments. His face, his hands, the van door slamming shut. And the horrible truth, she was alone, bleeding. And if she didn't move soon, she would die here. Her first attempt to push herself up failed. Her body collapsed back into the dirt, trembling from shock. Her heart pounded, each beat weaker than the last. She knew she was losing blood fast. Then something inside her shifted. Not a voice, not a thought, more like a deep instinct, a raw and primal refusal to stop breathing. She rolled to her knees. The world tilted, spinning, threatening to pull her under again. She fought against it, gritting her teeth, her breathing ragged. And then she did something extraordinary. With no medical training, no equipment, and no one there to help, Mary pressed the raw ends of her arms into the coarse dirt around her. It wasn't clean. It wasn't safe. But it was all she had, a desperate, last-chance tourniquet. The dirt clung to her wounds, caking and thickening. It slowed the bleeding. It hurt in a way words could never capture, but pain meant she was still alive. She got to her feet unsteady, swaying, and looked toward the faint glow of the highway, far in the distance. It might as well have been miles away. Her legs shook under her. Her vision blurred at the edges. But she started walking. Each step was an act of defiance. Every few feet, her knees buckled, and she had to pause to steady herself. The cold night air bit at her skin, making her shiver uncontrollably. She kept her arms lifted above her head, knowing instinctively that gravity could help slow the bleeding even more. Her bare feet caught on rocks and weeds, cutting her skin. Her breath came in short gasps, clouding in the cool night air. But she didn't look back. She couldn't. Mary told herself over and over, one more step, just one more. Not a mile, not 100 yards, just one more step. And then another. She thought of her family, her friends, the life she had dreamed of, the stage she might never dance on unless she kept going. The sound of the distant road grew louder, the faint hiss of tires on asphalt, the occasional whoosh of a passing vehicle. Hope flickered in her chest. If she could just make it there, someone might stop. Someone might help. Her pace quickened, though every movement felt like dragging a boulder uphill. She stumbled, fell to her knees, pushed herself back up. The taste of blood was in her mouth. Her heartbeat thudded in her ears like a war drum. Mary had no way of knowing how long she'd been walking, maybe minutes, maybe an hour. Time had dissolved into a blur of pain and determination. But finally, the black outline of the road rose ahead of her. It wasn't safety yet, but it was the first real chance she'd had since the nightmare began, and she was going to take it. The road shimmered faintly under the pale glow of the moon. Mary reached the edge, swaying on her feet. Her arms, what was left of them, were raised above her head. Blood had dried and cracked across her skin. Her body felt like it was made of stone, each breath a battle. Cars passed, one after another. Their headlights swept over her and then vanished into the night. She could hear them, feel the rush of air as they sped by, but no one stopped. She kept walking along the shoulder, her bare feet scraping against the rough gravel. Every step sent sharp jolts of pain up her legs, but she refused to collapse. Somewhere deep inside, she knew if she fell now, it would be over. Then, in the distance, a pair of headlights slowed. A blue van approached, hesitating as it drew closer. Inside was a married couple on a late-night drive. They saw her, this young girl, covered in blood, pale as death, barely holding herself upright. The wife gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. The husband pulled over immediately, jumping out before the van even came to a complete stop. They rushed to her, their voices urgent but gentle. "We're here. You're safe. Don't fall. We're going to help you." Mary's lips moved, but no sound came. Her throat was too dry, her body too weak. She only nodded, letting them guide her toward their van. The couple wrapped her in a blanket from the back seat, careful not to jostle her too much. The wife held her close, whispering soft words meant to keep her awake, to stop her from slipping away. The husband floored the gas pedal, one hand on the wheel, the other holding a flashlight to signal passing drivers, desperate to get attention. Minutes later, red and blue lights appeared behind them, an ambulance, responding to their frantic call. The paramedics jumped out before the vehicle had fully stopped. Their eyes widened at the sight of her. They moved quickly, speaking in clipped, urgent sentences. Oxygen mask, IV line, pressure bandages. Mary felt herself being lifted onto a stretcher. The night air was replaced by the smell of antiseptic inside the ambulance. A paramedic kept talking to her, asking her name, asking what had happened, but the words barely registered. She could hear the wail of the siren above her, a sound that somehow meant hope and danger at the same time. The ride was a blur of bright lights, muffled voices, and the deep, pulsing ache of her wounds. When the ambulance doors burst open at the hospital, the scene exploded into movement. Doctors and nurses surrounded her, eyes darting over her injuries. Even the most experienced among them looked shocked. One doctor whispered something to a nurse, his expression tight. Another adjusted the IV drip. Gloves snapped into place. Instruments clattered onto trays. Mary drifted in and out of consciousness. She caught fragments, someone calling for more blood, someone saying she'd lost too much, someone marveling that she was still alive at all. Through it all, she clung to the faintest thought. She had made it. Against everything, she had made it. And as the hospital team worked desperately to save her life, somewhere in the back of her mind, a truth settled in: this was not the end of her story. Mary Vincent woke in the hospital, surrounded by the quiet hum of machines and the low voices of nurses. Every movement sent waves of pain through her body, but her mind was sharp. She remembered everything. And she knew if she stayed silent, he could hurt someone else. Barely able to lift her head, she told the nurses she needed to speak to the police. Not later, now. When detectives arrived, they expected a traumatized, fragile girl, unable to speak. Instead, they found a survivor whose voice, though soft, carried steel. With her arms heavily bandaged and her body still weak from blood loss, she described the man in painstaking detail. His height, build, weathered skin, the way he spoke, the smell of cigarettes on his breath. She even remembered his truck, the tan interior, the dents on the side, and the look in his eyes when he realized she was not going to give up. The description was so precise that within hours, law enforcement had a name: Lawrence Singleton. Singleton was found at his home, calm, as though nothing had happened. But the police saw the evidence: clothing stained with blood, tools in his truck, and the nervous flicker in his eyes when they read him his rights. Mary's identification left no doubt. Even while recovering in her hospital bed, she pointed to his photograph without hesitation. "That's him," she said. "I will never forget his face." The case moved quickly. The brutality of the crime shocked California and the entire nation. Prosecutors knew this was not just about punishing a single man. It was about sending a message. In the courtroom, Mary faced him again. She was just 15, dressed modestly, her arms ending in neatly wrapped bandages. The jury could see the cost of his violence every time she adjusted her posture or took a deep breath. When it was her turn to testify, the room went silent. She told her story clearly, methodically, without exaggeration. She spoke of the riot, the change in his tone, the moment she realized he was taking her somewhere else. She told them about the attack, about waking up, about walking until she found help. Some jurors looked down, unable to meet her gaze as she described his actions. Others clenched their jaws in anger. The judge listened intently, occasionally glancing toward Singleton, who sat stiff, avoiding her eyes. The defense tried to paint him as a man who had made a mistake, but Mary's calm, unwavering testimony dismantled every excuse. She wasn't just telling the court what happened. She was showing them that nothing could erase her will to survive. After days of testimony, closing arguments, and evidence review, the jury returned with their verdict: guilty. Singleton was sentenced to the maximum penalty allowed by California law at the time: 14 years in prison. 14 years for a crime that nearly ended Mary's life. The sentence shocked the public and infuriated Mary's supporters. But even in the face of that disappointment, Mary stood strong. She had done what many could never imagine doing, looking her attacker in the eye and making sure the world knew exactly who he was and what he had done. Her bravery was not just about surviving the attack. It was about refusing to let him hide in the shadows. And though the legal system's limits were clear, Mary's fight for justice was far from over. When the gavel struck for the final time, the courtroom fell into a heavy silence. 14 years. That was the maximum penalty the law allowed for Lawrence Singleton's crimes. For a moment, it felt unreal. How could a life-altering, almost life-ending attack be measured in just 14 years? Mary sat quietly, her face calm, but inside, the weight of that number pressed hard. She had fought through unimaginable pain to testify, had relived every moment in front of strangers, had faced her attacker without flinching, and yet, the law's limits left her feeling that justice was incomplete. But the reality became even harder to accept when the years passed. Singleton was granted early release for good behavior, serving only 8 years of his 14-year sentence. 8 years. For the loss of her arms, for the pain, for the lifelong physical and emotional scars. When the news broke, the public was outraged. Newspapers ran headlines questioning the justice system. Radio talk shows buzzed with anger. People across California and beyond asked the same question: how could this happen? Victims' rights groups rallied in support of Mary, demanding change to sentencing laws. Politicians, feeling the pressure, began talking about reforms. And Mary, still young, still healing, watched as her personal nightmare became a national conversation. Reporters sought her out, expecting bitterness or rage. Instead, they found a young woman who spoke with clarity and determination. "I survived," she told them. I can't change what happened, but I can speak so it doesn't happen to someone else. Her words carried power because they were rooted in truth. Mary never pretended the pain had faded. She never claimed to forgive what was unforgivable. But she refused to let the man who tried to destroy her take away her voice. Even as she adjusted to her new reality, learning to live without arms, adapting to prosthetics, facing the stares of strangers, Mary used her story to push for change. Her calm but unwavering presence in interviews made people listen. Behind the scenes, she also worked with advocates and lawmakers to address the gap in sentencing laws. The early release of Lawrence Singleton had exposed a flaw in the system that could no longer be ignored. Public anger did not fade quickly. Letters poured into local officials' offices. Town halls filled with residents demanding harsher penalties for violent crimes. And in the middle of it all was Mary, a living reminder of why change was necessary. She was disappointed, yes. The sentence and the time actually served would never match the magnitude of what she had endured. But disappointment did not define her. Strength did, because Mary Vincent had learned something in those dark hours after the attack. As she walked bleeding along that lonely road, something no court decision could take away. She had learned that survival is not just about breathing. It's about standing, speaking, and refusing to be silenced. For most people, freedom is a chance to rebuild life. For Lawrence Singleton, it became an opportunity to commit more harm. In 1997, nearly 2 decades after Mary's attack, news broke that Singleton had been arrested again. This time for the murder of a woman named Roxanne Hayes in Florida. The details were horrific, and for those who remembered the Mary Vincent case, the shock was mixed with anger. Many had warned that releasing him early was a dangerous mistake. Mary was one of them. She had lived with the knowledge that her attacker was free, that he could hurt someone else, and now her worst fear had come true. Roxanne Hayes never had the chance to survive like Mary did. Her death became undeniable proof of what advocates had been saying for years. Violent offenders like Singleton should never have the chance to hurt again. Mary's reaction was not just grief. It was resolve. She had already been using her voice to raise awareness about victims' rights. But after Hayes's murder, her mission became even more urgent. She spoke at conferences, stood beside lawmakers, and gave interviews to national media, urging for stronger sentencing laws. Her story fueled a movement. Victims' rights groups grew louder, using the Mary Vincent case as an example of why legal reform was essential. Lawmakers in California and across the country began introducing measures to close the gaps that allowed violent criminals to walk free after serving only a fraction of their sentences. One of those changes became known as the Singleton Law. In California, it ensured that certain violent crimes would carry longer sentences without the possibility of early release for good behavior. It was not just a legal change, it was a promise to future victims that justice would not be cut short. Mary never pretended that a law could erase what happened to her. The scars, the loss of her arms, the years of recovery, those would always be part of her life. But she understood something deeply important. If her survival and her voice could help protect even one person from facing the same fate, then her pain would have meaning beyond the tragedy. Over the years, she met with other survivors, listening to their stories, offering strength when words weren't enough. She inspired people not only because of what she had endured, but because of what she chose to do afterward. Mary Vincent's name became synonymous with resilience. She was not just the girl who survived Lawrence Singleton, she was the woman who stood against him, who stood for others, and who fought to change the system that had once failed her. In the end, the Mary Vincent story is not just a tale of violence. It's a testament to the human spirit's ability to survive, to adapt, and to create change from the darkest moments. Her courage reshaped laws, saved lives, and ensured that the man who tried to silence her would instead make her voice echo for decades. Her attacker's life ended in prison in 2001, but Mary's impact continues. Every time a victim finds justice without fear of their attacker's early release, a part of her fight lives on. And so, her story closes not with fear, but with power. The power of one voice, one survivor, to make a difference in a system that desperately needed change. Mary Vincent's story is more than a crime. It is a living example of what the human spirit can endure and overcome. In 1978, she was just 15, a teenager with dreams of becoming a dancer, a girl who loved the freedom of the open road, a girl who trusted the wrong person. That trust was shattered in the most brutal way imaginable. She was attacked, mutilated, and left to die on a lonely stretch of road. Her attacker believed she would never rise again. But Mary did rise. With her life slipping away, she stood up literally and figuratively. She pressed the raw ends of her arms against the road to slow the bleeding. She began walking, mile after mile. Every step was agony. Every breath was a battle. But she refused to stop. She refused to surrender to the darkness. Mary was not rescued because she waited for help. She survived because she went out and found it. Her courage was not a single act. It was a decision made over and over again to keep moving, to keep fighting, to keep living. When she healed enough to speak, she did something even more remarkable. She testified in front of strangers, in front of her attacker. She told the world exactly what had happened to her, not for sympathy, but for justice. Her words put him behind bars, even though the sentence would later prove far too short. Mary could have walked away from the spotlight. She could have stayed silent, protecting herself from the pain of reliving those memories. But she didn't. She chose to fight again this time, not just for herself, but for every victim who came after her. She stood in front of lawmakers and demanded change. Her advocacy helped create laws that kept violent offenders from being released early. Her voice became a shield for others. Mary Vincent's courage teaches us that resilience is not the absence of fear. It is moving forward despite it. Justice may not always be perfect, but it is worth pursuing, and giving up is never an option. Her story forces us to look inward and ask, would I have the strength to walk that road, to stand in that courtroom, to speak for others after what I had endured? Mary's answer was always yes. And because of that answer, countless people are safer today. Mary's name should never be forgotten. Her fight should never be forgotten. Her spirit should never be forgotten. If you believe such stories should never be forgotten, share this video and help keep the memory of survivors alive. Let it serve as a reminder that courage can rise from the deepest pain and that one voice can echo far beyond a single life. Mary's story is one of courage against unthinkable odds. If you believe such voices should never fade, like to honor her bravery, share to keep her story alive. Subscribe for more untold true crime survival stories.